Icebergs, Ethics in the Digital Era, presented to you by Sharon Nelson and John Simek. As you all know, Sharon is the president-elect of the State Bar. She's also president of Sensei Enterprises and in business with her husband and partner, John Simek. Sensei is and John and Sharon are experts in the fields of digital forensics, information security, and information technology. They are well-informed, well-traveled, and well-published with no less than 10 books to their credit. Please give your time and attention to John and Sharon. I would also encourage those of you seated in the back to come forward, if you will. There are several empty seats up here for your comfort during the program and also for your comfort during lunch, because we will have lunch in here at these tables. Those of you who have empty seats at your tables, if you would be kind enough perhaps to raise your hand so that others know where empty seats are available, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George, for that kind introduction. We're talking to you today about avoiding the icebergs, ethics in the digital era. As I'm sure you all realize, you can now commit an ethical misdeed with the mere click of the send button, which we all tend to do from time to time. And I know this clicker has a delay, and apparently sometimes it needs to be clicked twice. There we go. Okay. It does. It's actually not advancing on my monitor, folks, in the IT booth. There have been, and I find many lawyers do not know, there have been changes to the ABA Model Rules of Professional Conduct. They were made last August, and they have not yet been adopted in Virginia, but in my conversations with Mr. McCauley, I understand that we will be moving to adopt them. So the number one thing that you want to recognize is the rule of competence has changed, the definition. It now includes knowledge of legal technology that you employ. You don't have to be a technologist. You're clearly not going to be a technologist. There are not very many tech-savvy lawyers. But if you don't understand the technology, you've got to get somebody who does to help you. So it's important that you pay attention to that particular change. Yeah, this thing is not advancing, or at least it's very slow, so that's all right. The other thing that's very important is the confidentiality of client data, and they've changed this a little bit to make it clear that you have to balance the technologies that are available to secure data against the sensitivity of the data, and you have to take reasonable precautions with the data. The problem, of course, is always what is reasonable, and that's very hard to determine in any particular case. Sometimes the client can say you don't need to take any precautions. Sometimes the client can say you must take precautions. And so you have to go and look at what you're never going to transmit the formula for Coke via an email, clearly. But there are things you can do that don't cost a lot of money, and you have to balance that against that data to determine what to do. Encryption, of course, is something that you're going to hear about again and again and again, because encryption is something we need to constantly be familiar with, and it is easier than you think to encrypt. Much, much easier, and John's going to help you understand that.
There's rules that talk about metadata as well. There we go, Paulie. So I have to ask this question because I just had somebody send me an email just this week asking about metadata, and what it is, and how to deal with it. Does everybody know what that term means? No? Nobody knows what metadata is? All right, it's just in a nutshell, it's information that's contained within a file about the data. Sometimes people say it's data about data, which isn't very helpful. So, as an example, if you're talking about a digital photograph, the information that's contained within the file would be such things as the date and time the photograph was taken, maybe the camera model that was used, those kinds of things. In a Word document, it would be whoever the author was of that document. Any track changes that are within that document, if it's enabled or not. Any of the fonts that are being used within the Word document, the last time it was printed. All that information is metadata. You don't see it just on the surface, on the file when you're looking at it, but it is contained within the file. So we have now where a lot of the bars and states are addressing metadata, and I love when they say, well, you have a duty that you can't go and, you have to be aware that the metadata exists there, but how would you know if it exists there to begin with? I mean, it's sort of a round robin thing here, but the rules, they don't say whether or not you can look at it or not, and the states vary on this.
Well, the opposing counsel's metadata. You know, my view is if they're stupid enough to send you metadata and you look at it, you know, the onus was on them to scrub the metadata, and that's what most people seem to think. So it's a little different from state to state. So these are some of the other tech-related changes. Now, we don't have to see a client face-to-face because we live in an electronic world. So now, it's okay if it's electronic, the same duties apply to prospective clients. Recommendations, endorsing or vouching for a lawyer's abilities, they are allowing in many states for you to be in one of these click things. You can't do anything about a LinkedIn endorsement. They just come. I mean, you don't approve that the way you do a LinkedIn recommendation. A recommendation you're responsible for. Where is your ethical duty with respect to endorsements? My personal view, and I haven't vetted this with Mr. McCauley, is that you need to know what's on your LinkedIn page, at least periodically. And you can be notified of endorsements, so that if you get one that doesn't look appropriate, you can hide it. You can't delete it, which is crazy, but you can hide it. And if you just look on LinkedIn's help, you'll find out how to do that. And here's how it happens, and it's not that you're doing anything bad. It will suggest, LinkedIn itself will suggest to your friends who might come to your site, do you want to endorse this person for these things? Now, if I have lectured, as I have several times, on healthcare data breaches, LinkedIn could decide that I'm a healthcare lawyer. And I don't know zippity-doo-dah about healthcare. But my friends, not knowing that, might think they're doing me a favor by endorsing me as a healthcare lawyer. I gotta hide that. I'm a data breach lawyer. That I know. And so similar things could happen to you quite unwittingly. So I think you need to take a look at that. Well, one of the things we're now going to do is talk to you about some of the stories that have come up pretty recently. And one, I'm sorry.
If they have questions.
Oh, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand. While I'm talking, John will look, and while he's talking, I'll try to look. But it is hard, so you may have to swing, because there's a lot of you out there. But we are happy to take questions. And that thing didn't like me. Okay, DLA Piper. How many of you read about the DLA Piper fiasco? Okay, not too many. Okay, well that's good. It's a great story. This not very savory looking gentleman over here, he was their client. And he is an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur. He had a company that he wanted them to take into bankruptcy. And then he got the bill. And he said, I'm not paying this bill. It was way over the estimate that they had given him. So he said, you know, they sued him. They sued him for payment of the bill, and he said, I'm not doing it. Now, DLA Piper, and I just learned this yesterday, is supposedly the largest firm in the world with 4,200 lawyers in 30 countries. That's a big firm. Its 2012 revenue exceeded $2.25 billion. And how did they get caught in this overbilling scandal? It was the traditional way through email. Come on, come on. I like it when I have my own clicker better. There we go. Okay. Now these are some of the quotes that you can read right there. These are emails by associates. I hear we are already 200,000 over our estimate. That's Team DLA Piper. Now Vince has random people working full-time on random research projects in standard churn that bill baby mode. That bill should know no limits. Now, DLA Piper.
Remember that rule, don't be stupid?
As electronic evidence experts, we love this kind of email. This is gold, real gold. DLA Piper published an internal memo explaining what happened, and explaining, and explaining, and explaining. And I read it to John in the car, and by the end of the memo, I was convulsed in laughter. Because over and over, they talked about how we never overbill. Our billing is always accurate. And this was just a poor attempt at humor, which they said about 6 times. So the more often you say it, perhaps the more devoutly you hope someone will believe it. Clearly no one does believe it. None of the lawyers are there now, not in connection with this case, but for other reasons. But there is a pattern of overbilling in a lot of firms, and especially the larger firms, and it is certainly what clients believe that we do. And the trail to overbilling is electronic. And we've seen overbilling multiple times, and it's always electronic. So the emails were particularly stupid, but there are ways that people are going to figure out what's going on. Now, to wake you up, there's Lindsay Lohan.
Not in jail.
Not in jail today, but wait for tomorrow. Lindsay's lawyer actually plagiarized some legal writing from the internet for one of her pleadings, and so she was fined. Let me assure you that if you found it on the internet, someone else can find it on the internet. And so plagiarized writings from the internet are not a smart thing to do. Now we have another very smart lawyer here. Huh? There we go. Here's an attorney who was recently suspended for posing as her dead client. And again, the trail was electronic. She pretended to be the deceased client, and this is the second time. She was already disbarred. And now she's, for the second time, pretending to be another deceased client, and she adopts his email address and then writes to all the people that are supposed to send him money, and she pretends to be him. So now I think she's probably going to go to jail because she's got theft, identity theft, aggravated document forgery, and insurance fraud. So I think her next visit is to be a guest of the state.
Wasn't Wisconsin that state too where the lawyer took a video of payment for his client?
Oh, the video, yes, the video. That was a good story. His payment for his services was sex with his client's girlfriend. And he recorded the whole thing as a receipt for services rendered.
That was Wisconsin.
But don't think Wisconsin has any hold on this stuff. It was in Virginia. We had a lawyer where he went to visit his client in jail, and she complained that he was being making sexual advances. And so they set up a videotape and an audio tape of this guy. He came into the room. He's not thinking that he's being videotaped or recorded by voice. And he gave her a hug as he was leaving, which he probably could have gotten away with. But then he took her hand and put it in his pants and said, "Wouldn't you like to say goodbye to your little friend?" So Wisconsin, we're doing our best to keep up with some of the other folks here. Just the way it is. Now this is in Florida. This may be tasteless, and it is tasteless, but I have shown it to Jim McCauley, and I said, "Jim, is there any reason why they can't do this in Virginia?" And he agrees with me. The answer is no, other than good taste. So I know a lot of you around here probably have pickup trucks. Please don't do this. Does nothing for the good of the profession. Now this is a gentleman, and I love this. This is a website called Mugshots. It's down in Gainesville, Florida. Certain states give us more rich stories. Florida's a good one for that. And this guy you see in the mugshot here, look down on the right. He advertises on this website. He gets busted for DWI, and they post his mugshot on the same page.
That's called targeted marketing.
Yeah, my lawyer knows all about this. I can see that. I think this is the guy I'm going to use. And another thing that's coming up, and this is kind of brand new, this has only been very recent, it's a software company called Law.Zoom, and what it allows you to do is to do live video conferencing with prospective clients. I can only imagine the ethical misdeeds that will go on here with the pressure to get clients that so many lawyers feel today, and now it's being recorded. So I think this is a very bad idea, but some people undoubtedly will do it. John, I think they talked a little bit already.
I heard Wendy talk a little bit about third-party services and terms and conditions. I know Jim and Wendy mentioned some of that stuff. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands for all those folks that have actually read any terms and conditions and didn't just say, click, I accept, I accept, I accept. So we're not going to embarrass anybody with that. But it's very, very important, as they pointed out, that you do understand the terms and conditions and the things that are contained within there. As an example, if you're an Apple user and you're using iCloud, Apple's product that's out there, if you've read the terms and conditions, you would know within the terms and conditions that Apple, right in there, in the terms of service, says that should law enforcement or the government come with valid warrant papers, whatever it is, that they will turn your data over to them without giving you notice. Probably not some place that you want to put your client data, right? Dropbox is a little clearer. When you read Dropbox's terms of service, they actually state right in there they will decrypt it and give it over.
That means they have the master decryption key, something you cannot let anyone have when your data is in the cloud. You have to have the master decryption key. Because if it's encrypted and they give it to law enforcement, contrary to urban legend, law enforcement, not even the NSA, can break encryption. So if they get encrypted data, it's garbage to them.
You may have even read in the news recently that the government is complaining about Apple and their iMessage service, right? The iPhone to iPhone text messaging that they send, because it's encrypted on the device and in transit, and they can't tap. Whoa, I'm here. They can't tap the thing in order to read the contents of those messages. It's shocking. That's probably what we want. But some of the other things that you need to be concerned with in these terms and conditions in your cloud providers: where is the data located? Is it within the U.S. or is it overseas somewhere? If it's overseas, you got to deal with cross-border issues. I don't think you want to deal with any of that stuff. If it's in the EU, you even have EU privacy laws now you've got to deal with. So that makes it even more complex. We talked about the encryption information on with the data. You want to make sure that it is in fact encrypted and that you can control that. Where is it housed? And are you commingled with someone else? And is it your data? Some of these terms, the provider can actually scour through the data and read it and reveal it. So you need to be very careful with some of these terms and conditions that are out there in with their cloud providers.
I want to say a word about Gmail, because I know a lot of folks in this area do have Gmail addresses. The Google Apps for Business are fine to use by their terms, but if you were using free Gmail, when you click, the terms and conditions say that they can go through your email. They can do anything they want with your email. So is your law license worth $50 a year to get the apps for business? I certainly think so. So be aware that that happens. And the other thing I want to say about Dropbox, because we get more questions about this than almost any other topic because it's so hot. Lawyers are really learning how valuable Dropbox is to share documents to other computers, maybe with their associates, maybe with their clients, and you can share particular folders. So you can do a lot of neat stuff with Dropbox. But
does everybody know what Dropbox is?
File syncing software. I'm sure the answer is no. So we have a Dropbox folder that's out there in the cloud, and John will throw something up there, and because I have access to everything that John does in Dropbox and vice versa, I have it in my Dropbox too. He doesn't have to email it to me. And if we're working with other presenters, we can create a file for that presentation, and all the presenters will have authority to get to any of the materials in the Dropbox. And Dropbox will update what's there. So it's really good, and sometimes you're going to use it for non-sensitive items, and that's fine. But if you're going to put sensitive stuff in there is an easy way to solve your ethical problem, and that is to password protect what you put in there. If you password protect a Word document or a PDF document, it is encrypted. And it's very simple to do that. We don't have the screens here, we're not going to take the time, but just search on how to password protect a document in PDF or in Word, and you'll find out. Once it's password protected, you're good to go ethically.
This one not so much, so because you just stay in this room.
Illegal software as well. The BSA, usually how folks find out about this is their disgruntled employees turn them in. So they call the hotline and say, you know what? My place I work here, they're running 5 copies of Microsoft Office and it's the student and education version, and they only pay for 1. So that's normally how it happens. But it's a tremendous amount of money and fines. So make sure your software is all legal and it's all licensed. We also suggest that you take the licenses for all of your software, put it all together in a single file, maybe stick it in a manila folder somewhere. That way, if the BSA or someone does come and ask you to prove whether or not your licenses are legal, you can just take that whole folder right out and say, here they are, there's everything right there.
And you get turned in by your employees. That's how it happens. And a U.S. Marshal will come to your law firm door with an ex parte order signed by a judge saying that you have to let them in and that they can immediately search through your network. Very scary stuff.
The biggest violations that we see are folks that use consumer software in their law practice. So it's not licensed for a business. It's licensed for personal use only. That's the #1 area. Or where they're using and buying, as I said, academic versions. And they're obviously not in school anymore. So those kinds of things.
Did Jim or Wendy talk to you about the horse hunter case? No? Okay. Well, since this one came down this year from the Supreme Court, we went back and forth on this. The bar wanted Mr. Hunter to have a disclaimer, and the bar also thought he shouldn't put client data out in public on his blog without his client's consent. We got half of a victory. He has to have the disclaimer, but he has a First Amendment right, without his client's consent, to put data on his website about the clients as long as it was public record data. So that's where that one shook out. So there was a lot of hoo-ha about that, but that's a recent case that I think everybody needs to take a look at. Blogging, I'm sure that there are a minimal number of you that are blogging, but if you are, write your own blogs. Don't buy them from somebody else, the ghost bloggers. They farm them to other people. It makes you look terrible. Can you have a law firm blog? Sure. As long as you're circling around and different people are writing the blog posts. Nothing wrong with that. Spamming to market, and I know you probably get the same junk emails I do. We have lists of potential clients for you, and they want you to sign on board, and then you're supposed to send it all out, and you have no relationship with those people. You have to be careful about the Canned Spam Act, but I can tell you that even if you're careful about it, you're going to get complaints anyway to the FTC and complaints to the bar. It just doesn't make any sense, and it probably doesn't get you clients. Be wary of forming a relationship, an attorney-client relationship, when you're just in the hi, how are you stages. I like to get folks off of email because I don't like leaving the trail, and the clients, the would-be clients, they just write stuff they shouldn't write. I think it's very important. I know that a lot of people like to have boxes, the contact, and then they say, tell us about your matter. I'm not crazy about that because they might say anything in there that might not be good. I mean, it might keep you from working for the other side. It shouldn't come for that. You might have to disclose it if you're already working for the other side. The disclaimer needs to be with that box, I think, but they also need to be told not to divulge any confidential information at that point. And they will. They do. It's just amazing.
Talk a little bit about encryption. Right, you see that stat there, 53 seconds. Every 53 seconds a laptop is stolen. That doesn't even include smartphones, right, that are lost, etc. But these are just some examples of encryption software that's available out there. Some are easier to use. TrueCrypt is free, but there's no tech support with it. So if you run into trouble with it, you're kind of on your own.
It's not a good solution for you folks unless you're very tech savvy.
Right, unless you're tech savvy. PGP is a very good product. It's now owned by Symantec. With that, you get tech support. You pay an annual fee for that, and it's not that much. It's like, I think you can get the lowest version is like $80 a year or something like that. So it's not that expensive. But you get support. You get English-speaking support, no less. So that's a bonus. Some of these other ones that are up here as well, they're all, like I said, this is not all inclusive. If you need to encrypt and centrally administer, so maybe you've got 5 different machines that you want to deal with and encrypt and control, then I suggest that you get what's called the enterprise level encryption packages, where they have an administrator, central administrator ID, that even though each individual user can have their own encryption, they have a secondary level where the administrator can control that as well. So if somebody forgets their passphrase on the encryption thing, you've got a back door into there. That's in the Luke slide. The other thing is email. It's a real pain in the butt, frankly, to start integrating into email and encrypting. So the little trick that we tell folks is, as Sharon pointed out before, if you need to send confidential information, send it in an attachment, send it in a Word or PDF that you've password protected it. Then you've protected that confidential information and sent it via email. But for heaven's sakes, do not put the open passphrase in the body of the email and text them. They have these things, they're kind of dated, they're called telephones. Pick the phone up, call the person, the recipient, and say, I just sent you some confidential information, here's the password to open it up. So that's much, much easier, faster, and simpler to do. Make sure you have an incident response plan, right? If you do have it, this you should put in place before your data gets compromised. So understand and know who you're going to call, who are your forensic folks that you're going to call if you need that, who are within your firm, or are you going to go outside, who are your IT support people, what kind of steps are you going to go through, and lay all this stuff out first before something happens.
The encryption of sensitive data, we get a lot of feedback from people saying, what do I have that people want? Well, I don't care who you are as a lawyer. You probably have a lot of personally identifiable information. If you do divorce work, which I'm sure a lot of you do, you've got all that information about their assets and bank accounts and all of that. People who do wills, trusts, and estates, you've got the same kind of information. And so the criminals come to law firms. Why? Because our security stinks. And they know that. So they're not going to go to a big corporation. They're going to go to the big corporation's lawyers, because that's how they can get in and get the data. A lot of folks have said, well, you know, Sharon, they're not interested. We've got a little two-person firm. Well, you know, in Alexandria, Puckett and Farrar, a two-person firm was breached. They went after them. In this case, it was anonymous, a hacktivist group, political hackers, who was angry at them for their representation of a Marine who had killed a number of Iraqi civilians. It doesn't matter what the motivation is. Somebody's interested in you for something. Sometimes it's criminals just getting that identity theft data, which may be selling on the black market for $8 per identity. It isn't much, but you aggregate it by a whole lot and it adds up to something. We had Wiley Rhine in DC, a very good firm. They were hacked by the Chinese. The Chinese now account for, what was it, 96%?
I think so, yeah.
Of, is it state-sponsored or overall?
State-sponsored.
96% of the state-sponsored hacking is now being done by the Chinese, and they are particularly targeting Americans and American law firms. And the FBI has been going all over the country talking to law firms, saying, look, you've got to take this more seriously. And there are a number of steps you can take that are easy. This is not that presentation. I just want you to be aware that there's a lot of stuff that exists. We have a lot of information on our website. Our book, Lockdown Information Security for Lawyers, talks about easy, cheap ways to make a lot of good stuff happen. You certainly need to think about it. At this point, the FBI believes that there are very few major law firms in the country that have not been hacked. And the average time until you find out that you've been hacked is in excess of 8 months. It's a long time for them to be in. Falsifying a document. Some years ago, we had a case where we had this lovely pro bono attorney in his 80s who went around to nursing homes and tried to help people. And he ran into this older woman, and she had had a perfectly valid med-mal case worth a lot of money. And so he took the case, and she ended up spending with him $40,000, and he missed the filing date, the statute of limitations. So she told this story to the pro bono lawyer, and he said, yeah, this sounds like you have a case. So he went to talk to the lawyer, and the lawyer said, oh no, she told me in a letter to abandon going any further because of her infirm health. And he produced a letter from him to her saying that, per your instructions on closing this case, I've spent the $40,000 on all the preliminary work, and I am closing this case per your instructions. Well, the lawyer didn't believe it. And so he actually went to court, and he got them to turn the lawyer's computer over to us for forensic analysis. And we determined that the date his letter was created was 2 days before his Virginia State Bar disciplinary hearing. So he had forged that letter. He is no longer practicing law in the state of Virginia. But don't think that you're not leaving a trail and that people can't find that trail. Even if you can't see the trail, scientists who do this kind of stuff absolutely can.
So we have another story from West Virginia where husband and wife are both lawyers, both work for different firms. Husband thinks wife is having an affair, so decides that he wants to try to get into her firm email account to see what's going on. So they had this really, really complex system at her firm. The email address, obviously, right, you're supposed to on the website, but the password to gain access to that, and there's a little button that's on there so that all the firm associates, partners could, click to log into their email from their website. And the password to get into there was the first initial last name. Really complex, right? So once he figured this out, he said, oh, cool. So he's sitting there watching her email, and it gets real boring because she's not having an affair. So then he decides that, oh, well, let's go and see what everybody else is doing. So he starts looking at everybody in the firm's email, including the partners. The bad part is that they happen to be on opposite sides of a major case. Probably a little ethical problem with that, don't you think? So he ended up losing his license, what, 6 months or something?
2 years.
Whatever it was. And then after that, after he was reinstated back as a lawyer, he was immediately hired by another firm that I think was probably looking for his particular skill set. But anyway, that's, who knows the rest of it.
Well, there's another reason people might come for you, business espionage. I don't think he started that way, but it ended up being that way. So that's another reason people will try to get into law firms.
Trust accounting and all that stuff, I'm sure you heard Jim McCauley many times talk about all this stuff. And we had one case where we were doing a review of a law practice, and the attorney was accepting tangible items as his retainers. And we kind of went, well, geez, can we really do this? We checked with you on it. I said, yeah, that's fine as long as it's documented and valuable. So, I mean, this guy's office looked like a pawn shop.
Truly.
He opened up his drawer, there were diamonds.
Yeah, he had watches, he had a drawer for rings, engagement rings, wedding rings, it was amazing. So, yeah, you never know what you're going to find out there.
So, make sure that your financial records and all this stuff, and that you've got logging and auditing enabled. I know a lot of you are probably using QuickBooks as your accounting packages. QuickBooks has the ability to audit so that you see what IDs were used or who did what changes were made throughout, but it's not enabled by default. So you want to make sure you go in there and turn that on, especially in QuickBooks, but any of your financial packages or any of your document management systems or anything that you might be using, so that you have at least a fighting chance to try to recreate history should something bad happen.
And I don't think there's a 2-week period that goes by that I don't find a story somewhere about someone in a law firm stealing from the trust accounts and or even the operational accounts and writing checks to themselves, whatever it is. So one of the things you certainly want to do are background checks on potential employees. And I will tell you here a story on myself. I was looking for a receptionist, and in comes this lovely older woman, and she's got this resume, and I'm thinking, this is great. She worked for the state of Tennessee for 21 years. This is a person who's going to stay around. So I hired her, and she was great. But she had a guilty conscience, and 3 months later, she came to me, and she said, Sharon, about that resume. And I kind of went, yes? And she said, well, I did work 21 years for the state of Tennessee, but I was in prison at the time. She had murdered her husband. Now she was an abused wife, and she had really tried hard to escape him with her children, but he followed her to another state completely and resumed the abuse. She knows it's the worst thing she ever did, of course, but she killed him. And she was the first woman to be paroled after killing her husband from the state of Tennessee. She's a terrific lady, and I'm glad I have her, but the day after she told me this, I instituted a policy of background checks. Which costs, by the way, online you pay $100 or less for a background check. So it should just be part of your hiring process so that you know about this kind of stuff before it happens.
Case management systems, right? Case management systems is to help you organize your practice and keep all your data and everything all in one big repository. I highly recommend that you have something like this, whether it's a Practice Master, Clio, Rocket Matter. There's a lot of really good packages that are out there. But I highly recommend that you invest in something like this. Not only is it going to help you keep with your calendar and your ticker systems and your follow-up and keep you out of trouble with the disciplinary board, but it's also going to make you more money. It's going to make you more efficient.
And Outlook is not a case management system.
To run that clicker?
No, but you're not going to have any better luck than I am. It's just slow.
Don't send native Word documents as well, right? You want to make sure that you lock them down beforehand. I'm sure all of you, your clients always tell you the truth, right? And they never screw around with anything. So, but just make sure that you lock them down, PDF it. You can actually, with a PDF today, PDF, I think it's Acrobat 8 and above, you can, at 8 and above professional, you have the ability in a PDF that if you want your client to comment, right, or do things like you would normally do in track changes, you can enable that feature so that all they have to have is the free Adobe Reader, and they can actually make comments and changes and things within there that you have allowed. You've given them a password, and that's all they can do. They can't mess with the contents or any of that stuff. So that may be a good alternative for you as well if you need to do some sort of collaboration with your clients.
Okay, you want to make sure that you whitelist court domains, because courts are handing out fines for people who don't show up, or the other side's legal fees. We saw that in Colorado. I actually asked Jim about this issue with respect to other law firms now that we have agreed in some places to accept service via email. And I asked him, I said, do you only have to whitelist the attorney who's of record, or do you have to whitelist the firm? And Jim's opinion was that it would be more ethically prudent to whitelist the firm, so long as you have an active case with that firm. So that's what Jim McCauley says, and I believe the gospel according to McCauley. So
do folks know the difference, what whitelist is and blacklist?
Whitelist means anything from that domain comes through, or anything from that specific email address comes through, depending on how you set it up. It is the opposite of blacklist.
It's a configuration setting for your spam filters, is what it has to deal with. So if it's whitelisted, then it tells the spam filters, we don't care what the contents of this thing are, let it through.
The AutoComplete function is wonderful. It saves us from typing, but it gets us into trouble. I have a friend who's an attorney. His name is Mike Goller. I work with him in the ABA, and Mike has a secretary whose name is Sharon. I get so many of Mike Goller's confidential documents. He simply can't abandon the AutoComplete, so I simply have to keep saying to Mike, I just deleted what you just sent your secretary, Michael, and she didn't get it. So, yeah, but you can make really bad mistakes, and there are some famous ones where, in a case where there was a big settlement proposal, as opposed to sending it to their associate or colleague that they were working with, they sent it to a Wall Street Journal reporter. That's not a happy thing. We've also had a case where a law firm, there was a partner having an affair with a female associate, and he just picked the wrong thing in that case. He picked the, when he was talking about what they were going to do that evening, he didn't send it to her, he sent it firm-wide.
Yeah, but the distribution list was just one below her name.
That's it. That's exactly probably how it should happen, something stupid like that. So you have to watch out for all that stuff. And anger, we have seen so many cases where lawyers spitting at each other have gotten themselves in trouble. I know that I've gotten emails that have made me as righteously angry as some of you have, and the minute I read an email that wants me to type an immediate response, I know I have to get up. I just have to leave the desk, the office. I can't be near the keyboard because somebody has said something monumentally stupid, rude, something, and it needs to be responded to, but by someone who is calm, not by an angry person. So make sure you don't get caught in that trap. Emotions can be a terrible thing. Now, passwords, the rules have changed, and people don't like to hear this. So I apologize in advance for telling you what you don't want to hear, but you got to hear it. We can't have 8-character passwords anymore for anything that's very secure. Not for your financial data, not for client confidential data. Why? Because now technology has changed, and any 8-character password, no matter how strong it is, can be cracked in less than 2 hours. So we got to move. So the recommendation is a strong 12-character password. And I know everybody groans. You can do it semi-easily because you can make a passphrase. I love Abingdon 2013 exclamation point. Whatever. I mean, that will work, and then you can remember it. I know it's a pain in the rear, but no, although the experts disagree about how long that password will survive, they will tell you that it will exceed 17 years. So do you want to be cracked in 2 hours, or do you want to be 17 years strong? Now, for those of you who are saying, yeah, but I've got, because I know you keep telling me, John and Sharon, that I got to have all these different passwords. I can't use the same one over and over again. Then you need a password manager. So you only need to remember one password. What can you use as a password manager? We have 2 suggestions for you to look at. One is called LastPass, and the other is called eWallet. The other solution, which I don't recommend for lawyers, is what John does. He has an iron key flash drive. The reason I don't recommend it for lawyers is because you're going to forget the iron key. I know you, I am you. I forget the iron key. So probably hardware encryption is not the best idea. Software encryption is probably the thing you want to do to hold on to those passwords and make your data secure.
And I want to caution you on one. You may have heard of another product called 1Password. That product, just this past week, has been discovered to have a very, very serious security vulnerability in it. So I would avoid that one at the present time.
Computer calendars are great. Smartphone calendars are great. One day you're going to be in court and they're not going to work. I still believe in having a paper calendar with you. It's still a backup, and I believe in backups. Leaving your computers on at night. Some of you are going to do this because you have to, because you use LogMeIn or PC Anywhere or some similar product. Okay, but then you have to have a screensaver on, because you don't know what the cleaning crew is doing in your office building. And we have seen copious collections. Remember, we're digital forensics people. This is what we do for a living. We have seen copious collections of pornography loaded by cleaning crews. We've actually seen child porn in a Dairy Queen computer network. I mean, you just don't know what people are doing, so you got to keep them out. The famous story from I think it was Denver. They had an amusement facility there, and some people with insider knowledge broke in, and they had the combination for opening the safe, which had about 40 grand in it, but they didn't know how to use the combination. And then they saw that somebody there had left their computer on, and they went, so they Googled the make and model of the safe and found instructions for how to open the safe. So, you want to be careful with these things.
Google is your friend.
Google is your friend.
Change the defaults, and I don't care what it is, right? If your PC when you first fire it up, if it's your wireless router, if it's a piece of software that you just bought and you installed, change the defaults. The problem is that everyone knows what the defaults are. The defaults are well documented on the internet, so if you leave them at the defaults, you're at risk that someone else can come in and potentially access that information. Secure your wireless. So make sure that you're running secure encrypted wireless. There are 3 types of encryption for a wireless network: WEP, WPA, and WPA2. WEP and WPA have been cracked, so they are vulnerable. So you only want to be using WPA2
and that is
as
true.
your encryption.
That's true both at work and at home, and when you connect when you're mobile. So remember, WPA in parentheses 2, you should see that when you look at wireless networks. That's how you know you're on a secure network. And I want all of you, I'm going to give you homework, because most of you have wireless networks at home. I want you to check the setting on your router to make sure that it is encrypted with WPA2. If it is not, change it. If it doesn't support WPA2, you got to get rid of that router. It costs about $80 to buy a new one. That's cheap money. But I will tell you, we know of a lawyer who had law enforcement come to his house with a warrant, and they seized all of his computers and all of his kids' gaming stations because his IP address was used to download child pornography, and they assumed it was him. His wireless was not secure, and the child porn was downloaded by his neighbor across the street. So I know that gives you some sense of religion about the need to check to make sure your wireless is WPA2.
Be wary of Wi-Fi hotspots as well. Most of them are not secure. They're by design, right? Now everyone has free wireless. You go into Starbucks, you go into McDonald's or Wendy's or any of those places. They all have this free wireless. But typically they're not secure. So you want to make sure that you're using secure communications when you're transmitting across there. I'm a big fan. I'd much rather see you use your data plan off of your phone. You know, whether you're doing it, whether the phone's tethered or whether you're doing a mobile hotspot or something like that. That way you control it yourself, and you're not riding with somebody else's network.
But the problem is just reading stuff in a hotspot Wi-Fi.
Is there a problem in reading it?
Yeah, just go read the newspaper.
If you're just reading the newspaper, then that's fine. If you're checking the scores for the last night's ball game, that's all right. But if you're opening up email and attachments or anything like that, remember that information is transmitted in the clear if it's not encrypted. So that's a problem. But if it's just casual kind of stuff, then yeah, that's you have to kind of weigh that. Now, on the public computers, I want you to be wary of those as well. These are computers that are in hotel business centers, cruise ships, internet cafes, things like that. On average, the studies that have been performed, that machines that are in public libraries like that, they're already infected with at least 7 pieces of malware. And that malware can include such things as keystroke loggers and screen capturing devices and all that kind of stuff. So unless you're just reading the news or checking the sports, I wouldn't be using public computers either.
And that's one reason why Although we do carry our laptops more than most people, no matter where we go. On the cruise ship the last time we went, I only had my iPad, and that was fine, but it was my iPad. I wasn't going to use the internet cafe on the ship. I just don't believe that was safe.
36 cents a minute, that's good too. Make sure you have up-to-date security suites as well. We like Kaspersky and Trend Micro, but any suite that, and the reason I say security suites is it's no longer just antivirus, because you now have to contend with malware and phishing and firewalls, and these products now are smart enough where they actually not only are they signature based, where they already know particular characteristics of a virus or worm or something like that, but they also use heuristics, so they know when something is acting like a virus or a Trojan, and it will block and pop up a warning message beforehand. So you may be the first one on the block to get one of these things, but make sure you're up to date and you've got really good internet security implementations.
Many of you may know Yvonne McGee, she's now with the BBA, she was with the FBA. This is the face Yvonne made when I asked her if she had done any test restores of her backup, because she had no idea that unless you test restore some of the things that you have backed up, you don't know whether the system is working or not. That is just as true of online backups as of physical media backups that you keep. So make sure you do test restore. And I know one of the questions we get is, can you recommend a good online backup company? Carbonite is a good one. There are others, but Carbonite is one good one that we recommend.
And part of the reason there is I know that with Carbonite, you can change the encryption key. So you control it before you send that data off to the cloud to them.
And let's say too that we used to be called cloud curmudgeons, but we have gradually evolved to the point of believing that good cloud providers provide better security for lawyers than they do for themselves. The trick is finding a good one. That's not so easy, and you certainly don't want any of the big ones because they will not negotiate with you, but the small ones will, and that may be a more secure way of storing your data, and it's better for this, business continuity. In a data center, you have a guaranteed, what they call the 5 nines, a guarantee that 99.999% of the time, you will have internet connectivity and power. So if your office is out and your home is out, you drive to a Starbucks somewhere, as one of our clients did, and he was able to run his law practice from the Starbucks.
Using his VPN.
So, right, using his VPN, so he was good, but that is really a wonderful way. And usually these data centers, they have offices that you can use right there. You can drive to the data center, and they'll rent you offices if you need to do that as well. So you should have a disaster recovery plan. It never survives its first encounter with the enemy. That's the first thing to realize. The plane goes all to hell, and you realize you hadn't thought of a lot of stuff. And I know that happened also to us when we had a fire in our building. We were kicked out of the office unceremoniously by the fire marshal, who said that the sprinklers weren't working and we couldn't be there. He did allow us to grab our server, and we had to bring our server home, and all of our guys had to crowd into our family room, and we fed them McDonald's breakfast and Pizza Hut pizzas, and that was for a whole week, and our 2 labs were in heaven because they got all the leftovers. So they had a great time. But we learned that we needed to have 2 phone lines in an emergency so that we could very quickly, because we get a large volume of calls, we could very quickly say, give me your number and name and we'll call you back, and somebody would call from their cell phone. And then we had 2 lines coming in so we could handle the traffic. But that was something we had never thought of. Communications is the biggest thing when there's a disaster. You need to have multiple methods of communications and spell that out. The employee termination plan is also very important, because disgruntled people and people who you fire are always disgruntled, and most of them steal data. So you need to make sure that you're doing something about this, and there's really only one safe way to fire somebody, and this is it. And if you're not willing to go to these extremes, have a plan. If you don't have any kind of plan, plan or checklist for employee termination? We have one at Sensei. I'm happy to share it with any of you. Just email me and I'm happy to send it to you. But you want to make sure that folks can't get back to their computers, that they have no further access. That there's termination of any way that they can get to your network, and that they sign that they've given you back all of your data. I think the last stat I saw was that 56% of people who leave law firms take law firm data with them. Sobering statistic. 59, thank you. But that's very sobering. And I'm watching the clock here. Okay, we're good for a little bit more. This is, come on. This is a church billboard. Please return the laptop. Everybody steals, right? And laptops are the #1 thing that are stolen, although I think tablets and iPads are getting right up there too. So you want to make sure that you take what measures you can. It's just like your phone. You got to be constantly mindful of where your phone and your laptop is, because those are things that can undo you a little bit. There is a product called LoJack for laptops for $39.99 from Absolute Software. It installs a little piece of code on your laptop, and if somebody steals it, it calls home and it says, hey mama, here I am, here I am. Now the police will be the ones to go get the laptop, and it's usually a bonus, because where there's one stolen laptop, there's usually lots of stolen laptops, along with smartphones and other things.
So understand how data can leave your firm, right? Flash drives, probably the biggest thing. Now, boy, you can get flash drives that are several hundred gigs. And even external hard drives that are about yay big, and they're the size of a pack of cigarettes. And they hold 1 terabyte worth of information. It's amazing the amount of information that can be on there. So make sure that you understand Dropbox as well, right? If somebody installs Dropbox and they have it pointing to, or have the files, the firm files going into there, they're now synchronizing up to the cloud, and they can be downloaded from any other computer with that same Dropbox account. So understand how that data may be leaving, and make sure you have any sort of logging and those kinds of things.
Let's stop on this one, because you guys are bad with your phones. You need to have a PIN.
Make sure you have a PIN or a complex swipe code on there. And the reason for this is, whether you know it or not, whether you intentionally are saving anything on your phone or not, there's data on your smartphone. There's a tremendous amount of data. Smartphones really are nothing more than handheld computers that can make a phone call, unless you're an AT&T customer. Just kidding. But you want to make sure you have a PIN on it, so that the PIN locks it, so that even if you lose it, somebody can't gain access to it. And you don't want to use that 4-digit PIN that's on an iPhone. You want to make it a complex PIN. So you have to turn simple passcodes off. And I would like to see, at least on an iPhone, where you're having at least 6 to 8 characters, and not 4, because there's software specific for the iPhone. And there's a company that manufactures software that targets iPhones with 4-digit pins, and it'll crack them in less than 15 minutes. So, but you also, the other reason that you want to put a pin on there, especially for an iPhone and iPad, is because it enables encryption. So when you do that, it encrypts the device, which is a good thing. We've been talking about encryption, how you want to do that. You want to make sure that you can remotely wipe the phone as well. So that you have, if you don't have that service as part of the phone, like the iPhone does, it has the Find My iPhone app and the iCloud, where you can actually remotely wipe. If you have an Android phone, you may need to install a product like Lookout, which gives you that ability to remotely wipe the phone. So things like that, you need to do that. We also mentioned complex swipe codes, because if you just do like an L pattern for an unlock code, you hold that up to the light, and you can see, because of the oils from your fingers, what that pattern is. So if you use a swipe pattern, you want to have a pattern that comes back over itself. Much more complex. I'd rather see you use a pin, though, like an 8 character or whatever.
And we're going to be around the rest of the day, so feel free to stop us and ask us questions. I know George wants to talk to you, so don't go anywhere, because he's got something very important to say. But John and I, want to say thank you for inviting us.